The Land of the October Dead. The sky was the color of muddy water, gray and brown. A storm brewed within its murky depths, but for now a steady drizzle dampened the stark landscape, stealing the color from this bleak October vista. No blue painted the sky. No green graced the lifeless grass. These had, long ago, bled into the marshy ground to nourish the worms that thrived in its decay. Sound was muted and dull, as if it was filtered through a plastic drum. No birds sang, no crickets chirped, no children laughed. The only sound was the droning patter of the rain in the mud. The air was heavy with the stale stench of rotting earth, like the fall of an autumn dream. Shadows lay everywhere, ever expanding, like fluid night, hungry to devour anything that glimmered with the slightest hint of hope, silently waiting like assassins. The rain was cold and stung the skin, but the man trudged onward through the mud and rain, his boots leaving the soil with a sloppy sucking sound with each labored step. But it seemed that the sound should have been louder. Everything here seemed that it should be more, somehow, but wasn't. The man wore a simple black t-shirt and black jeans. His shirt stuck against his body, the sloughing of a corpse's skin. Gooseflesh ran up the length of his exposed arms, tracing the tattoos that covered them, and looked like leprosy upon his skin in these failing vestiges of day. Their once intricate lines were now blurred with time. The once vibrant colors were now a dismal camouflage of the desolate land around him, just darker shades of gray and brown. He walked slowly, methodically through this October wasteland. His back hunched, his head down, his long hair plastered to his haggard face and skull, his hands thrust deep in the front pockets of his jeans, a vain attempt to warm himself. He resembled a refugee, and in his own way he was. He walked past a grove of towering leafless oak trees. All of the trees had died long ago, and beetles swarmed in black chitinous armies over the bark, burrowing, tunneling, eating, turning to waste, to consume the lifeless hearts of these dead kings. A once majestic oak had a child's swing hanging haphazard, forgotten from one of its sagging limbs. It blew vacantly in the bitter wind. He wondered what it had looked like 1,000 years ago, or even yesterday. He shook his head, sending droplets of water flying from his rain-soaked mane, and sighed. Time has no meaning where oblivion holds dominion. But he again thought of the swing. Children had once played upon it. Had they sang songs as they swung in long arcs beneath a sky that knew the touch of birds? He wondered if they had laughed. He wondered what laughter had sounded like back then, when the oaks were still proud and the willows still wept. Had those children trick-or-treated in this perpetual land of Halloween? He tried to laugh. It was foreign to him. And what came out was a blasphemy, a dull choking sound that reminded him of regret. He heard the rope of the swing creaking with the wind, and his mind was instantly flooded with memories of a life he could almost forget, but not quite. In his mind he saw his beloved wife hanging from a rafter in the attic. She was wearing her wedding dress. The white lace stained yellow from urine when her bladder had involuntarily released. The rope that gripped her delicate little broken neck had dug a deep furrow into her flesh. Her body swayed like a pendulum, ever so slightly back and forth, as if death led her in a silent and slow waltz. Her mascara had run in black rivers from her eyes and down her cheeks, and had dried with her eyes wide open, bulging from their sockets, staring accusingly down upon him. Flies had already laid their eggs on her exposed, swollen and blackened tongue. Maggots writhed helter-skelter in a frantic dance, feeding greedily upon the rotting meat. He remembered the dreamlike feeling of unreality as he had cut her corpse down and as he kissed her cold face, paying no heed to the stench or the maggots. He remembered holding her in his arms, her head in a stiff askew angle over his elbow, and the terrifying shock as gas escaped from her stomach with a horribly loud groaning sound when he severed the noose from her throat with his old pocket knife. He had dropped her with a scream, her body thudding lifelessly on the wooden floor, the body frozen in its unnatural position, her eyes still on his, still accusing him. It had taken over an hour for him to calm down from his hysteria to regain enough composure to continue. He found her favorite blanket in the cedar chest reserved for winter and wrapped her in it. And then he carried her down the stairs and out the back door, into their backyard where she kept her garden. He had buried her close to her wishing well and had cried like a child with each shovelful of dirt that covered her. Then he had fished around in his pocket, pulled out a penny and tossed it into the well, just in case. He remembered the suicide note that she had quickly scrawled on a piece of yellow legal pad paper. It had been clenched in her left hand, wrapped around her wedding ring. He carried the note in his wallet still, along with pictures of people he only vaguely remembered or vaguely cared to. The note was now yellowed and smeared. It read simply, "I hate you." The letters were bold, and in places the pencil lead had pressed through the paper. A low moan escaped him as he remembered that note. How long had it been since he had thought of that? It didn't really matter. He had ached from such a remote depth when he had read those 3 little words, words that weighed more than an encyclopedia of science terms. And the ache was still as deep, even now. How many Halloweens ago had that been? He noticed that the physical pain he still felt had the taste of metal in his mouth, like the nickel-plated barrel when he had rested his teeth around it, cold and hard and final. How could she hate him? It was a question he had asked himself 1,000 times before, but the answer never revealed itself, and God wasn't talking to him anymore. He continued past the diseased and dead grove with a convulsive shudder, and remained on course for the cemetery. It was the same ritual he had completed countless times for as long as he could remember. The already dark sky swirled with darker hues, and he knew that the deluge would soon replace the drizzle. He could see the faint and hazy silhouettes of the mausoleums and sepulchres in the distance, and behind them, a short distance away, he could see the angel on her obelisk waiting patiently for the prodigal son to return. His own tomb was nestled between 2 marble monoliths whose names he never considered important. He wished he was already there, cradled in the complete darkness of his casket. There he could sleep and dream the dream of the damned, to dream of living a life that he had forsaken. For life is the dream of the dead. Maybe one of the living had decorated his grave with the token gift of fading flowers. Maybe roses that might have been beautiful and fragrant before they had been plucked from the vine and withered like love upon his gray marker. These flowers he would take into the crypt. He was anxious to lie beside his wife tonight, where the cold was just as cold. But at least he would be home. He would give the flowers to her just like every night. He looked forward to their nights together, just the 2 of them, with the autumn tempest raging outside. How she glared at him with such contempt and loathing, her eyes cutting into his soiled soul. How she struggled, her arms and legs thrashing violently against his icy embrace, desperate to free her from him. And the hatred ringing in her unyielding screams that echoed endlessly inside their sealed vault. It sounded like love, didn't it? She would still be wearing her tainted wedding dress, so beautiful in her blue-lipped fury. Her long, jagged nails would dig into his aching flesh again. How he loved her! How she hated him! He wept hollowly through a death-masked smile and continued homeward where a candle burned in the window of her sepulchre. And it was almost like being alive again.